Today my topic is light 1, found or ambient light. Quite literally, light makes a photograph that, along with composition, are the two basic building blocks of photography. We will have three lectures about light in this course. The first one is about found or ambient light. Light you don't care, that you don't care. You will learn how to see and identify great light. In the next lecture, we will talk about color and light intensity, and the third lecture, we will talk about flash. Along the way, we will rolling in more information about lenses, apertures, depth of field, and shutter speed because all these elements work together, and because adjustments in one always affects the others. Shooting in ambient light. A photo of rare baby bird and it waters pear chick is lit by just a single reading lamp. This weak light gives a sense of tenderness, warmth, and caring that matches the delicacy of the tiny bird. The fact that the background of this photo is completely black eliminates eliminates the distraction. The depth of field is very shallow, just on the bird's eye. That was out of necessity because the low light required a wide open aperture. This simply, but this is very simple but effective photograph tells the viewer that the future of this species is literally in our hands. Next is exposure compensation setting. There are two ways to adjust lighting: making adjustment in the environment and in the camera. Getting a picture well lit is about doing both. Three things are involved in adjusting the camera for light: the exposure compensation setting, the ISO setting, and the histogram. We will look at the exposure compensation first. Next one is the exposure compensation dial on the camera is like a dimmer switch on the wall of your home. When your camera is in automatic exposure setting, in program aperture priority or shutter priority, dialing up or down on the exposure compensation dial increases or decreases the exposure. It's often good to dial down the exposure compensation to a little bit under the optimal exposure as chosen by the camera. Subjects often contain a good deal of contrast between light and dark areas, and you should expose for the highlights. Consider the brightest part of a scene when making exposures so that you do not overexpose things. Making the entire exposure just a bit dark, underexposed allows you to retain some details in the highlights and make the colors richer. This technique also prevents you from clipping out the highlights. You can bring back details in the shadows, especially in digital photography, but you cannot bring back details in the highlights if they were blown out. In some scenes, such as a snow scene, you may want to overexpose, very light or very dark. Scenes can fool your camera and you need to compensate for that. Try putting your camera in manual mode and going up close to the subject. Check the exposure level, lock it, move back and shoot. You can also try this technique if you are shooting against a black background, such as the mouth of a cave or a dark wall. Next is ISO setting. The ISO is simply the sensitivity of the sensor in a camera to light. It is set in increments of 100. An ISO setting of 400 in a dark scene, you need a higher ISO to make the most of the whatever light is available in a brighter scene. You want a lower ISO so that you don't overexpose the picture. Don't be tempted to shoot at a high ISO setting all the time. You may think this will allow you to keep your shutter speed high and your aperture small to get your subject sharply in focus. But this will but if you shoot at a high ISO during daylight hours, you will overexpose the picture. Often, it's better to choose the lowest ISO you can in order to blur the background somewhat and make the subject pop. The quality of photographs is generally better with low ISO. Higher ISO result in images that are grainy or noisy. Higher end cameras tend to have a tremendous ISO range, allowing you to shoot in almost no light. This range of settings also allows for fast shutter speeds in low light, which may eliminate the need for a tripod. Next is the histogram. On a histogram, the left is dark and the right is bright. If you have a if you have few peaks in the histograms, and they are off to the left side, you know you have underexposed the image. If the peaks are off to the right, then you know that you have overexposed the image and lost some information and details. The histogram is a graph you can call up on the back of the most cameras that allows you to see whether your images are underexposed, overexposed, or perfectly exposed. Keep the peaks of the histogram in the middle if you can. Next is behind the lens. This one is very simple photograph of a very rare bird. This is a minutes old chick and at waters Perrier chicken, a very rare breed in this country, just hatched out of its egg. You know how photographer lit this, it's a reading lamp. Just a single tungsten bulb, like a reading lamp, bedside table lamp. They had this little lamp turned on it in the incubator room at a place called Fossil Rim Wildlife Center, which was doing breeding with these animals in Glen Rose, Texas. Photographer had spent the night on the floor of the incubator room hoping to photograph the hatchings of these birds. This one is just out of the egg. There is a weak light on in the corner of the room, throwing off just the faintest, warmest, graceful, colored light. This glow and this golden glow, and I thought, yes, that's good enough to shoot in. I didn't want to introduce flash. It's a delicate little chick. I didn't want to blast away. I just wanted something very subtle, tender, warm, caring. This light matched the delicate feel of the subject. I could see it at the moment. The histograms gives you more information than you can get by just looking at the image of the back of the camera. Next is quality of light. The first step is engaging light in a photograph is analyzing where the light is coming from and its relation to the subject. Front lighting is seen when the light is coming from behind the photographer and onto the subject. This is the most common way that photographers light things, but it also can be the most boring. If the sun is low on the horizon, then front lighting can work, but if the light is at all harsh, front lighting can flatten out a photo, offering fewer shadows and less depth. Backlighting is seen when the lighting is coming from behind the subject. It is also called silhouette lighting because the subject often goes black, becoming a silhouette. Hatched lighting is when the light is very harsh and hitting one side of the subject. One side of the person's face, for example, might be brightly lit and the other in complete shadow. This lighting can be dramatic. With ghost lighting, the light is coming from below. This is the creepiest, most unattractive kind of lighting. Overhead lighting is, of course, lighting from above. It's sometimes called interrogation lighting. Classic Rembrandt lighting is wonderful for photography. Here the light is subtle and it comes in from both the side and a little to the front, kind of three quarters on the subject, that creates a triangle of light on the side of the subject opposite the light source. The shadow created by this type of light gives a picture depth and richness. Try to find ways to vary ambient light. Walk around the subject and pick out the best spot. Then shoot in that direction, keeping in mind that light subtle light is better than harsh. Finally, be patient. Sometimes the ambient light will vary itself and solve your problems for you. Light to look for. Yes, grey light on an overcast day is perhaps the most lovely kind of light. But when you shoot on this kind of light, be aware that not all grey skies are created equal. The sky is the light source, and on some days it becomes a big light dome that can blow out white completely. One solution to this problem is to get higher than your subject and shoot down so that you eliminate the sky. You can also use a building or trees to block the sky. Found lighting that happens indoors can be also be beaut- Found lighting that happens indoors can also be beautiful. If the sun is low and you are shooting near a window, you may be able to capture direct beams of light. The warm glows after sunset is another lighting condition that is hard to beat. A field shoot at a small pond illustrates the benefits of waiting throughout the day to get the best light. Remember, there is no excuse for bad light in a landscape. The landscape is not going anywhere. Again, walk around the scene and shoot from different angles to get the best image. At the pond on this shoot, the boat gives us a leading line into the scene. Add elements such as people to the scene to go beyond the obvious. Have fun with it. That's all for the day. Thank you so much.